She was a woman judged, dismissed, and forgotten by her city, but her faith changed history. This is the story of Rahab, from the walls of Jericho to the lineage of Jesus Christ. Watch how courage, trust, and God's grace turned her life upside down. Stay with us for Bible Chronicles as we reveal a story of redemption that proves no one is beyond God's mercy. The city of Jericho stood proud behind its towering walls, a fortress of stone and arrogance. Merchants filled its markets, soldiers guarded its gates, and fear whispered through its streets. Beyond the Jordan, an unstoppable people were advancing, the Israelites. Rumors spread like wildfire. Their God parted seas, crushed kings, and walked with them in fire and cloud. Jericho trembled, though it pretended not to. Hidden within the outer wall lived a woman named Rahab. Her house was built into the city's structure itself, a fitting image of her life. Known by her profession, defined by shame, judged by whispers, Rahab had learned to survive in the margins. Men came and went, but none saw her. None knew the quiet hunger in her heart for something more than survival. At night, when the city grew still, she would stand by her window and look beyond the walls. She had heard the stories of Israel's God, how he dried up the Red Sea, how he defeated mighty kings. Unlike the leaders of Jericho, Rahab did not mock those stories. She believed them, and belief, though small and trembling, had already begun to rewrite her destiny. The moon hung low over Jericho when two unfamiliar men slipped quietly through its gates. They moved carefully, observing the strength of the walls, counting the guards, studying the city that stood in defiance of Israel. These were spies sent by Joshua, the successor of Moses, tasked with preparing the way for conquest. By unexpected providence, the men found refuge in the house of Rahab. Perhaps her home, built into the city wall, made it easy to enter unnoticed. Perhaps it was divine orchestration. But before long, word reached the king that Israelite spies had entered the city, and they were seen at Rahab's house. A pounding knock shook her door. "Bring out the men who came to you," the king's guards demanded. In that breathless moment, Rahab faced a choice that would define eternity. She had already hidden the spies beneath stalks of flax on her rooftop. Now she stood at the doorway, heart racing, life hanging in the balance. "I do not know where they went," she told the guards, sending them toward the Jordan in pursuit. When the door shut and the footsteps faded, Rahab knew there was no turning back. She had chosen the God of Israel over the security of her city. Faith had turned into action, and action would soon demand a covenant. The night air was thick with danger as Rahab climbed to her rooftop where the spies lay hidden beneath the drying flax. The city of Jericho slept uneasily, unaware that its fate rested in whispered conversation under the stars. "I know that the Lord has given you this land," Rahab confessed, her voice steady despite the risk. She spoke of the fear gripping Jericho, how the people had heard of the Red Sea's parting and the kings defeated in the wilderness. "The Lord your God," she said, "is God in heaven above and on the earth below." In that declaration, a woman once dismissed as immoral became a theologian of faith. She recognized what her own rulers refused to see. But faith required more than words. Rahab asked for mercy. "Swear to me," she pleaded, "that you will spare my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, all who belong to me." She was not bargaining for herself alone. She was interceding for her family. The spies agreed. They instructed her to tie a scarlet cord in her window, a visible sign marking her house for deliverance. Just as blood once marked doors in Egypt, this cord would signal protection. As the men escaped down the outer wall by rope, Rahab held the scarlet thread in her trembling hands. It looked fragile, too small to save a household, yet heaven would honor it. Beyond the fearful walls of Jericho, a greater miracle was unfolding. The Israelites had reached the banks of the Jordan River at flood stage, its waters violent, swollen, impossible to cross. Yet their leader, Joshua, carried a promise from God. They would pass through. At dawn, the priests stepped forward, bearing the Ark of the Covenant. The moment their feet touched the water's edge, the current halted. The river rose in a heap upstream, and the ground beneath turned dry. The people crossed not in panic, but in awe. It was an echo of the Red Sea, proof that the same God who led them out of Egypt was leading them into promise. From her window, though she could not see the river directly, Rahab felt the shift in the air. News spread quickly. Israel had crossed the Jordan on dry ground. Terror rippled through Jericho. Hearts melted. Courage drained. The God of Israel was no myth. He was moving. Joshua commanded 12 stones to be taken from the riverbed as a memorial, a reminder for generations that the Lord makes a way where there is none. And inside her home, the scarlet cord hung silently in the window, the sign of a covenant, the mark of a woman who believed before the walls ever fell. The gates of Jericho were sealed shut. No one entered. No one left. Soldiers stood alert upon the towering walls, scanning the horizon. Then they saw them, the Israelites approaching, led by Joshua. But what happened next made no military sense. Instead of ladders, battering rams, or siege engines, priests stepped forward carrying the Ark of the Covenant. Armed men marched ahead, but no war cry rose from their lips. They walked one silent circle around the city, and then returned to their camp. No attack, no arrows, only silence. From her window in the wall, Rahab watched with trembling hands gripping the scarlet cord. The people of Jericho mocked from above. Some laughed. Others shouted insults. Yet beneath their bravado was fear. This was not the strategy of ordinary men. It was obedience to a God who fought differently. For 6 days the procession repeated. One silent march each day. Dust rising. Trumpets sounding briefly. Then stillness again. The silence became heavier than battle. Pressed against Jericho's confidence, cracking its pride. The people did not understand that heaven was measuring their walls, not of stone, but of stubbornness. And Rahab waited. Faith is often not loud. Sometimes it is simply holding on while God moves in ways no one else understands. On the 7th day, the sun rose differently over Jericho. There was tension in the air, a stillness that felt like breath being held by heaven itself. The Israelites approached again, led by Joshua, but this time they did not circle the city once. They marched around it 7 times. With every lap, unease grew inside the city walls. The rhythm of marching feet echoed like a drumbeat of judgment. On the 7th circuit, the priests lifted their ram's horns. The sound of the trumpets pierced the sky, long, relentless, commanding. Then Joshua gave the order. Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. A roar erupted from thousands of voices. Not a cry of fear, but of faith. The ground trembled. Stones cracked. The mighty walls of Jericho shuddered and collapsed inward as though struck by invisible hands. Dust swallowed the skyline. What generations had built in pride fell in a single moment of divine power. Inside her house, built into the wall itself, Rahab held her family close. The scarlet cord hung unmoved in the chaos. While judgment fell around her, mercy stood firm. When the dust settled, one section of wall still stood. A quiet testimony that faith marks the difference between destruction and deliverance. Smoke rose from the ruins of Jericho as Israelite soldiers moved through the shattered streets. The once proud fortress was now rubble beneath their feet. Cries echoed in the distance, and the sound of collapsing stone faded into silence. Judgment had come swiftly, just as the Lord had promised. But amid the devastation stood one untouched section of wall. At Joshua's command, the 2 spies who had once hidden under flax returned to fulfill their oath. They navigated the broken pathways until they reached the house marked by a scarlet cord. The sign still hung from the window, bright against the dust-filled sky, fragile in appearance, yet stronger than stone. Inside, Rahab waited with her father, mother, brothers, and sisters gathered close. Fear lingered in their eyes, but she stood steady. Her faith had brought them to this moment. The spies led them safely out before the final destruction consumed the city. Rahab stepped beyond the ruins of her past, beyond shame, beyond reputation, beyond the walls that once defined her life. She had been known by her profession. Now she was known by her faith. And as Jericho burned behind her, a new identity began to rise from the ashes, not built on her history, but on the mercy of God. The smoke of Jericho faded into memory as the Israelites made camp. Among them stood Rahab, no longer hidden in a wall, no longer defined by whispers. She had left behind the ruins of her past, but stepping into a new people required courage of another kind. At first, she and her family remained outside the camp, as was custom. She was a Canaanite, once considered an enemy, once seen as unclean. Yet the God she had chosen was not a God of partial mercy. The same Lord who stopped the Jordan and toppled Jericho was weaving her into a covenant story far larger than conquest. In time, Rahab was welcomed fully into the community of Israel. She learned their songs. She listened to the stories of Abraham and Moses. She came to understand that this God did not merely rescue, he restores. Then came another unexpected grace. Rahab married Salmon, a man of Israel. From shame to covenant, from isolation to belonging, from survival to legacy. Her life, once built into a doomed wall, was now rooted in promise. Redemption is not simply being spared from destruction. It is being given a future, and Rahab's future was only beginning. Time flowed gently, and the child of Rahab and Salmon, a boy named Boaz, grew strong and wise in the ways of Israel. In him, the courage and faith of Rahab were passed down like an unbroken thread, weaving her story into the fabric of God's greater plan. Every act of mercy and faith in her life rippled outward, shaping generations she could never have imagined. Rahab watched as Boaz thrived, a man who honored God and carried forward a lineage destined for greatness. She reflected on the walls of Jericho, now ruins in memory, and realized how far grace had brought her. A woman once defined by shame now stood as a symbol of God's power to redeem, to transform, to bless the seemingly unworthy. Her name was whispered not as a curse but as a testament to faith, courage, and divine favor. Through Boaz came the line of King David, and ultimately, generations later, the Messiah himself. What began as a scarlet cord in a window became a scarlet thread through history, a reminder that God sees the heart, not the past, that he raises the faithful, even from the margins, into his story of salvation. Rahab's life proved one undeniable truth. No one is beyond God's redemption and faith. Even the smallest, most unexpected faith can move heaven itself. Years passed, and the story of Rahab became more than memory. It became a lesson etched into Israel's identity. Mothers told their children about the scarlet cord that spared a household. Priests recounted how faith, not rank or wealth, determined God's favor. Rahab's courage had not only saved her family, but had written her into a legacy that would echo for millennia. She often reflected on that night when fear pressed upon her like a stone and the king's guards demanded her silence. Her heart had chosen God, and that choice had reshaped the course of history. From the margins of Jericho, a woman considered unworthy had become a covenant daughter of Israel. Her story was living proof that God's grace is not limited by human judgment, that redemption is available to anyone who trusts him. And beyond the immediate blessings of her family, Rahab's faith rippled into eternity. Through her son Boaz, she became part of the lineage of Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. Her past no longer defined her, her faith did. The scarlet cord, once a simple rope of survival, had become a symbol of hope, obedience, and the extraordinary power of trusting God. Rahab's journey reminds all who hear it. No life is too marred, no story too broken, and no soul too lost to be redeemed. Faith, even from the margins, moves heaven and changes history forever. Thank you for watching Bible Chronicles. Kindly subscribe for more videos.